Hi, beautiful beings. How are we? I'm really excited that you're here with me. Let me just check. It's saying share my screen. I'm not sure. I think we're live. I think one of you's with me. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for joining me. It's Andrea Foulkes, and we're going to talk this evening. I'm doing this from my computer. Normally, I should do it from my phone because my computer's a little bit older. We're going to talk about truth and conspiracy and the Epstein drama and the difference between what's going on the planet right now and how it's going to help us, and where we stand on it all, because what I'm seeing from my perspective might be different than what you're seeing. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Nobody is monitoring this, so I'm having to talk to you and monitor the chat at the same time. So it might be a little bit tricky. So bear with me. I'm doing it on a computer I haven't used for a long time, and I realize it's not the best one, but we will persevere. So how are we all? Hope you're all well. I was inspired today. I've made some notes for us all because I thought it's good to look at the notes and to remind myself what I really wanted to talk about, which was this whole conspiracy drama that's going on, and with the Epstein files and all of this. The problem is people are being guided away from their inner selves, and this emotional stuff can really trigger you, and it can make you very sad, very angry, very disassociated even. And then we saw people like Deepak Chopra, and people were saying, oh, I'm really offended at his post to his followers on his newsletter. People were very, very offended by what he'd said, which they felt was very dismissive, and they're very upset by this. But it was like, what kind of answer are you expecting from someone who is more than likely a narcissist, more than likely on a spectrum, that is not going to be honest? What were you expecting? The gift of all of this, the gift of everything that's going on, is that we get to go inside ourselves and we get to heal ourselves. And if we miss that gift of what that is, the whole thing has no real bigger, higher purpose. And so I also saw people who are very big, let's say, leading lights in the truther conspiracy community. And I've seen people not being well recently, and I was trying to explain, if you move to a future timeline of yourself, if you're in a chronic illness position, you are forced to do this emotional inner work in a very quick and rapid way. So the best thing you can do, and the best thing you can do when you're trying to help somebody, is not say, oh, I hope you get well soon, oh, I'm so sad to see you're in this situation, which is normal behavior. What you want to do is move to a timeline where they're already healed. So you're holding them in a vision in your mind where they're already healed. And if you can encourage them to visualize themselves in a timeline where they're already healed, that has to align, because everything that's in the way between you and moving to the timeline where you're already healed comes up to be healed and processed. So you visualize where the trauma and the injury is in their body. You try and encourage them to visualize letting it go, to bring in the healing. So we're moving to a future timeline. And I see people in the truth of conspiracy thing stuck in this old vibration, or at worst, what they do is say, oh, this person got ill because they're a targeted individual, and they got targeted because they were doing this or this, and they got taken out, and this happened and that happened. Where in truth, probably more than likely, the ailment that happened to the person was probably from stress and anxiety, perhaps them not even being grounded, not earthed, because when we have too much electrical charge in our body and we don't earth it, we get sick and ill. And that can lead to things like strokes, heart attacks, things like that. When we're not running on magnetic frequency in a harmonious way for ourselves, and so much buildup happens, an emotional backlog of things we've not processed, not loving ourselves, no boundaries. So where I'm going with this also is in the truth or conspiracy movement, we see people being really goaded into huge levels of rage and anger with everything outside of themselves. Everything we're seeing is making them angry. Whereas in truth, you want to go into yourself. This is not about encouraging people to be rageful and angry with the world at large. But at the same time, you don't want them to be apathetic either. So you don't want them to go, oh, woe is me, la, la, la. You want them to take personal responsibility. So let me just have a little look now. Oh, Jenny's there. I hope you've enjoyed the meditation. She downloaded one of my meditations yesterday. And so it just reminds me to remind everybody, sometimes when you order a download on my website, it might go in your spam folder. I don't know why. My email address, Andrea@andreafoulkes.com or Andrea@andreafoulkes.co.uk, usually ends up tragically in people's spam folders. So look in your spam folder. If you send me an email and you don't get a response, look in your spam folder, because it's more than likely in there. There's not much I can do about it. It's the settings. So let me just take a look at your messages. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Chat amongst yourselves. I'll put chat away amongst yourselves, because it's just me monitoring this, so I can't really write much more there. So thanks for joining in. If you have a question, pop it in the live chat and I can answer your question, especially around this conspiracy thing. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention about the Epstein thing is there is a virus called the Epstein-Barr virus that is in most people's bodies. 90%, 95% of people have it, whether it's unactivated in most people. But when it gets activated, which is from stress and anxiety and just being overloaded with life, it can come from having, oh gosh, I forget what it's called. Anyway, histamine intolerance as well. It can lead to histamine intolerances, all these kinds of things. So I kind of worked that out in myself. But I thought it's interesting. It's called the Epstein-Barr virus. And we're going through the Epstein files, which could turn people into very stressed, very anxious individuals. And we don't want that to happen. That's not what we want to happen. We want to rise in consciousness, not be lowered in consciousness by everything they're bombarding you with. Oh, a lady's saying she ordered that and it did not come through to the email, so I can't do it. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks for saying that. Yes. I don't know what happens. I always resolve it though, but it is a bit tricky. So, you know, when we're dealing with this truth of community, and we saw it during the Ovid times, you know, so many people were goaded into rage and anger. And then I spoke to other people who were like, oh, I really enjoyed that time. I got to relax. I didn't work so much. It was really wonderful. And so with other people, they went into too much stress, too much anxiety, too much cortisol overload. You know, those who are near menopause, you can end up with an estrogen overload. So then we're going to look at why you get triggered so easily. You know, why do other people seem to be able to remain calm? Life events don't stress them out. And as many of you know, I did get stressed out by life events with my parents. And so we're looking at the origin of that. Is it past life? Is it inner child? Is it ancestral? And when I say those things, somebody yesterday said to me, oh, you say those things, but how do we heal them? How do we heal them? Well, you know, the other thing that I talked about today on Facebook is that I feel with everything that's going on, people are being guided through this whole truther Epstein thing in this direction. They're being guided over here to not do the emotional work on ourselves. You know, you should see in the truther movement and the conspiracy movement and the conferences and all the things that are linked to that, you should see what I saw over 25 years, which is people hearing information that's empowering to heal themselves and running in the direction towards that. But instead, what we see is people being guided into a more negative dimension, into lower frequency. And you cannot heal if you go into the lower frequency. And the key is the inner child a lot of the time. But also, I deal a lot with entities, as you know. In fact, I just came off working with a client online, and we were dealing with some very, very ancient entities who had been attached thousands and thousands of lifetimes from a galactic war. They were attached to him, and they had put him in a reincarnation grid in this life, which was heavily, heavily traumatic. I mean, really traumatic. I mean, really, a mother who didn't really even want him to be born, that level of traumatic. He'd lost a twin in the process, but he'd managed to survive. So I'm saying really heavy lineage incarnation grids. And then when we start to peel back the layers of what is this, what is creating this, no truth or conspiracy thing is going to help you heal your inner world. It's going to give you more fascination with targeted individuals, secret space programs, super soldiers, buzzwords like that, which can be very entertaining. But at the end of the day, is it going to guide you back into you healing your inner state? Because the only energy that's going to uplift humanity is each individual one of us going through our own emotional stories. Let me just see what anyone's saying. So let's just see. Yes, Leon is saying it's all about balance. Don't get sucked into the Epstein Andrew thing, loosh distraction. Exactly. Loosh. Now, those of you who don't know what loosh is our energy. It's energy harvesting. And that is one of the other things that I think goes on with the truth, the conspiracy community. It is a loosh harvest for your emotional rage and anger. And of course, a lot of people now saying, you see, we told you we were true about Andrews, true about everything we knew about all these institutions, monarchies, which leads me on to another subject of sovereign monarchy and crowning ourselves. Okay, so in ancient times, we've always had leaders. I would love us to exist in a timeline where we were all in the frequency of self-autonomy, self-leadership, where we could trust humanity to take responsibility, to be in a consciousness of the highest good for all concerned. But that's not really where we have found ourselves. We could say in Lemurian timelines, maybe people existed in that frequency, but we didn't have such a physical body in that timeline frequency. So as we moved into a different level of consciousness, at one of the most highest times in that consciousness, we would have a group of people within small communities. It wasn't so much global leaders, it was small communities. Because if you remember, and I see this when I'm taking people into past lives, people have emotional reactions to things, and they stomp off in the past lives, and they can't get their way back because the place they lived had no name, and they can't remember necessarily how to get there. So people lived in smaller communities, and we would have bards. These were storytellers. As things evolved on and people moved out, you would have a bard who would come and tell stories of other villages and other towns. But within that, and we see this with indigenous tribes sometimes, you have a leader, you have somebody who's elected a leader. And we have that in these Western countries. But let's take the UK, for example, and the drama that is going on right now with Andrew, and everyone's pointing the finger at any of them good or truthful. But it's the right to rule. Now, the right to rule with our English monarchy is distorted. It's not a truth. It's not a person who has the highest vibration. Now, you can look at the Queen who died recently, and there are all kinds of stories about her and the children that would disappear, but we don't know the absolute truth. But what we do know about her character is she was stoic, and she stuck with that position, and she played that role. Whereas we're looking at her children now, and we're seeing people who don't have her tenacity to rule in that way. And also, when we look at the bigger picture of that family, should they really be ruling? Because it shouldn't be people who have manipulated in wars and have the most money get to rule the people and take money off the people. That was not the origin of the true sovereignty and crowning yourself. And we see it depicted in I don't know, because I'm slightly dyslexic. I say things a bit twisted. Like, you'll find at some point I will say 2004 and mean 2024, but I'm catching myself doing that. We all do this. And unless you video yourself, you'll never catch yourself doing it. Whereas I have noticed myself do it. I am talking at attention, and we will come back to the crowning in a moment. But I have noticed myself, and if people have said to me, "Oh, that was a long time ago," because I asked for a bank statement from 2024, but I didn't say 2024. I said 2004. But then I analysed, why am I saying that? I thought about that today. Why am I saying 2004 instead of 2024? And I think in my dyslexic mind, it's 2024. It's harder to say than 2004, even though I'm seeing the right number in my mind. So be aware of those things, that we can make slight mistakes. But going back to crowning ourselves as sovereign beings, that's why you're depicted. You would see. I've even got a little plaque outside my house with the goddess Diana, and she's got stars around her head depicting a expanded crown chakra. And so those who have a higher frequency always beam a light. You beam a frequency and a light, and it's depicted in your auric head, which is a crown. But that crown is not a physical crown with jewels on it. It is the illumination of the crown chakra, of evolving consciousness, of holding a higher frequency and being in a more evolved state of consciousness and a greater wisdom. And those who had the more evolved consciousness were the ones who ruled the community, because they were in integrity, they were in discernment, they could be trusted to make choices with their expanded consciousness for the betterment of all of humanity. Not like, oh, this will serve me, I'll be all right, Jack, which is where we see with the more Babylonian approach of monarchy. So I hope you're enjoying what I'm saying. Let's see. Yes, as Leon's saying, it could just be a phony pony story of this arrest. We don't know. It's very draining, as Jenny says. It's all very draining. And I did post about this on Facebook, and some people seem to be very upset that I was not giving it as much attention as they were. But I don't think it serves me to put my energy in that. It's just going to pull me down even further. And if you do find yourself engaged in it, and you do find like, I need to know about this, there is something in you that you need to heal, maybe from knowing about that information. Is it triggering something in you, something from your inner child, your womb, your past lives, your ancestral story? Is there something you need to know about you personally that you can heal by this information coming into the public domain? But where the conspiracy people come in with the raging anger and the sort of protesting but never doing the inner work is a waste of your energy, and it doesn't necessarily serve what you want. It actually serves often the very opposite to what you want. Would you agree with me? Post in the little chat if you think that it kind of takes people away from their truth. And let's see what else I've written about. Yeah, and it's about injustice, and the inner court of equity is where we make real resolution. We've got the external maritime law court of equity, where no equity really ever gets found, and the only people who make money are lawyers. They make money. So if you can stay in the inner court of equity, and that isn't always the case. People have conflicts and troubles with people. And I was talking about someone only yesterday and today that had got themselves in a court case. And the thing is, justice very rarely prevails, and even the winner doesn't necessarily get the due recompense for the distress, that not just the distress of whatever's happened, but the distress and the time and the energy and the money they've invested in taking somebody outside of themselves to court. Because you're still going to have to heal the emotional karma between you and that person. And it's easier to see, is my conflict with them from a previous lifetime? Do I have a conflict with this person from another timeline? Am I going into the Babylonian court of equity only to find that I've got to go into the inner court of equity, which was cheaper in the first place if I'd have gone into my inner court of equity? And if you're looking to prove to an external group of people, see, I was the winner, I was right. The problem you have, and this is where people like Deepak Chopra, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Deepak Chopra, come in, or the Dalai Lama, or people along that vibe, right? Or Mother Teresa, even. People have invested a belief into these public figures. So they've decided they like them. Okay, so when you've invested energy and time into liking and supporting a figure, you've maybe bought their books or supported them or believed in them, thought they were an amazing soul doing great work in the world, and even if the other people went, oh, I'm not really into that person. Can you not see? Oh, I think they're amazing. I'm very offended that you don't like them. And let's use Deepak Chopra as an example. So some of those people will still be, you don't like them. And let's use Deepak Chopra as an example. So some of those people will still be for that person and say, oh, it's, they've got it all wrong, or, oh, well, everybody makes mistakes, so they will justify the behavior of that person to align with the choice they made further back, to decide that this was someone they were going to admire and support, and now they've been found out to be wrong. And of course they don't like it when I say things like what I'm going to say now, is this is a game of learning to read energy. That will be your biggest gift in evolving your consciousness, clearing your past lives, clearing your inner child, clearing your ancestral. You will get to be bestowed by the gift of your own self the ability to read energy and people. And so I looked at Deepak years ago. In fact, I even ended up not with him together, but we were on the cover of a magazine listed. I think it was the first ever copy of a magazine that was called Soul and Spirit. And I was like, oh, I wished he wasn't featured on the front cover with I don't want to align to that energy. It wasn't about his personality. It was just, I looked at his energy and I didn't align to that energy. Same with most of the Dalai Lamas that have been in my lifetime. I didn't align to that energy. It was not something I aligned with. I looked at Mother Teresa and I didn't, as soon as I developed my ability to read energy, I didn't resonate with her energy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does it make sense? Let's look at the things. It's hard for people's egos to look at themselves and admit they're wrong. Yeah. I mean, this is hi, Ginny. Lovely Ginny's here. It's hard to look at ourselves because we have to admit that we have made a mistake. And I think for a lot of people to admit they've made a judgment call that turns out to be wrong, means that your intuition is off. And then it brings up a deeper story of healing, of shame. And so then they have to go back to the original shame. Then you have to go to the origin of your shame. And that may well take you back to heal a past life. It may well take you back to heal the inner child, you know? And so when I see the truther movement, who are really, and the conspiracy movement, and, you know, who are really into ETs and stuff like that, it's, is that a byproduct of just not facing their own emotional trauma and wanting to be rescued and saved by beings outside of yourself? You know, I do believe there are beings. Even today, I helped a client heal a galactic war that had happened to him and put him in a reincarnation grid here on planet Earth that had been very, very heavy for many incarnations. There were entities attached, and we released those today, legions of them. But it was only possible because he'd done some work on himself before. He was able to hear my sharing his truth, where I have no emotional investment in your story. I can just read the emotional Akashic records and I share the truth with you. And you can hear a truth in your own soul if you're ready to hear that truth in your own soul. If you're not, and you're more on a narcissistic spectrum, you know, occasionally you get people who come through energetically who are mainly narcissistic, and they're really not ready to do this inner work. So they will rebel against it. They will say, oh no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. You know, their ego likes the idea of finding out about past lives, but not really about evolving their own soul inside themselves. And what does this really mean about me personally? Like you personally, what does this mean when I go inside myself and I see the things I've done? Who you were is kind of irrelevant. It's only that you understand from an emotional aspect how those choices in other timelines, which are coexisting now, are affecting you now. You know, and so when we see people who aren't doing this inner work, aren't facing their past lives, you know, pushed to the wall, they want to say, oh, you know, people are being targeted, people are being taken out, this is happening. When, you know, it's just the byproduct of people not looking at their own emotions or stress or anxiety, and their own fear and their own guilt and their own shame, and they're going to have to own their own stories and their own behavior. And they think that this is going to be exceptionally difficult. But once you set the intention, it's not that hard to trawl through this stuff and expand your consciousness so you can work on yourself as well. Let's see if anybody's saying anything else just now. No, but thanks to all these great comments. And going back to Andrew, you know, and the royal family, and you know, you can see that that man has lost whatever light he had. He has lost it. You know, if you look at him as a young teenager, he had more of a light. I don't know what happened to him between then and now, but things happened. And obviously, he went into a lower vibrational version of himself, doing not so gracious things. Um, and all those things have been revealed, and the arrogance, and also he seemed to embody a arrogance that upset people. When you see interviews about people who've worked for them as bodyguards or things like that, the underlying story that comes across that was he was arrogant. His arrogance is his downfall. His entitlement is his downfall. You know, so even if you find yourself in a gracious higher incarnation, you know, you have to use that incarnation to be impeccable, to serve the people in the highest frequency for the best way for the whole of humanity without getting drained yourself. And if you get that wrong, he is a good example of getting that wrong. As far as we've seen, his sister is a good example, Princess Anne. I don't ever see anybody saying anything negative about her. even though we don't necessarily believe we need a monarchy as such, and certainly maybe not a family who have got there through nefarious means, if you had to pick a character out of that family to say they are likable, you would pick her because, she recycles her clothes, she doesn't botox her face, she is very natural in her way of being. Yes, she may come across a bit brusque or whatever, but she has to deal with the public every day on an everyday level. So do you understand where we're going with all this and why it's so important that we don't dwell on the minutiae detail of these files? Like, when I hear people say, but I need to know what's in those, I need to know. Do you really? Do you really, really need to know? Because if you bogging yourself down with the minutiae detail of these files is going to take your vibration down, then them releasing those files has served the very purpose they wanted you to do, which was to take your vibration down and to get so distracted in this, you don't do the inner work on yourself. So I wanted to share that. Do we have any questions about anything? It's like Deepak represents the old Babylonian priests, in past lives. That's the energy they hold, the Babylonian occult priests, doing their dark magic tricks. And we're moving beyond that now. We don't need to work in that energy anymore. We're releasing past lives where we may have been tied into timelines with those people, and we're letting it all go. We're coming into the highest vibration of integrity in ourselves. And it's the same in relationships. Don't feel you have to stay stuck in relationships because you've deemed this person to be a soulmate or a twin flame. Maybe that's a big story for another video, but in general, it doesn't work like that. These are people you may have some past life soul connection to, be it earth or some other dimension, but it doesn't mean that you are a lost aspect of that person and that you're only complete if you're together, even though it's a very hard relationship and it's really like martyrdom and suffering. But because we're twin flames, we're going to stick with it. No, 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 no. That's just totally misunderstanding everything, and that's distorting things. Even when I see people who are meant to be a twin, I've had many stories around people who are meant to be a twin. That could give you the feeling of a twin flame, maybe, if you were meant to be a twin. I had a client once where she said, there's something around my birth, can you look into it? And I looked into it and I saw that she was meant to be a twin, but the twin went away and only she incarnated through her mother. But I said the other baby, that energy, that soul went to somebody else in your family at the same time, and somebody else had a baby at exactly the same time as your mum. And she was then crying, saying her dad had an affair and he had two ladies pregnant at the same time. And so, that could be what you might perceive as a twin flame, someone who was going to be your biological brother or sister. That can be a misunderstanding on the spiritual journey of twin flames, I feel. So let us see. Deepak, oh, Ginny says, Deepak says the mind was never meant to be still. And she says, well, looks, yeah, exactly. I mean, he said some other crazy stuff as well that I saw people posting about, to vilify himself, vilify his behavior. But, he could have been put up as part of the sort of cabal spirituality, the false light spirituality. So there were many of these teachers who were catapulted into the mainstream, and had a very high public profile, and stayed in that high public profile for over 30 years. Why was that? Why was that allowed? And now they're falling from grace. Don't let them falling from grace taint your beliefs on spirituality, because They were the false light teachers. What's being stripped away is the false light teachers. The true teachers of the soul will rise up, but don't let that make you turn your back to evolving consciousness, whether we call that spirituality, self development, you know, it gets kind of caught up in the whole UFO program thing. Try not to um get that involved in that. Try and separate those, because evolving consciousness is the real gift of this story. And I do believe there are benevolent beings in other dimensions, but nobody is here to save you. You have to save yourself, and you have to evolve your own consciousness, and you have to look inwardly at yourself and the choices you've made, and you have to look at the choices you're making outwardly now. And those choices have to constantly be monitored by yourself. Am I making good choices? If I've made a bad choice, I'm going to forgive myself. I'm going to try and make a better choice. My next choice is going to be a more evolved choice for myself. Is that a good choice? You don't, nobody knows, only you, if you can be self-reflective enough to go, you know what, that was not a good idea to do that. And you have to be honest with yourself, and a lot of the time people are not honest with themselves, let alone anyone else. I see people who are really suffering. They're like, no, I'm fine, I'm really not suffering. And they are suffering. They're having a really difficult time, but they don't want to lose face, and they want to pretend they're okay, when being authentic is better than pretending you're okay. Lots of Jenny's saying lots of people talking about guides. I just don't resonate with that. I want to talk to my side. Yeah. Well, I don't even say higher self. I try to say as much as possible your multi-dimensional authentic self than your higher self. It's not up there. It's just who you are. It's your multi-dimensional authentic self. But because of trauma, it's fragmented off, or we're disassociated from it because we haven't healed the inner child, and we haven't healed the ancestral story, and we haven't healed the past life, and we haven't healed the wound trauma. And when we unravel all that, we start to connect with our multidimensional authentic self who exists in other timelines. But when everything stays boxed in the trauma, and I will talk more another day about, when I work with clients, I always want to know what names you've gone by, because if I'm going to help you heal your inner child, I need to know what names you've ever gone by. Because if you start fragmenting off into telling me, oh, this is my name now, and my name is Sarah, but actually, I'm like, is your name really, have you always been known by the name of Sarah? Oh no, I just didn't like my birth name, so I changed it when I was 20. I'm like, okay, so how are we going to heal your inner child if I'm calling you Sarah and your real birth inner child name is Jane? I need to speak to Jane. That's vitally important in the healing of the inner child. And some people have fragmented off to lots of different names. So I need to address all the names you've ever gone by and the abbreviations of your name. Deb or Debbie. Deb is different than Debbie. Some trauma may have happened to Deb, but not to Debbie. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? So we have to go through this stuff, and when we hit the truth, like I had another client the other day. She said, oh, I thought I dealt with this inner child stuff before, but I'd not dealt with this. I said, no, because we'd been addressing not me, whoever you'd worked with before had been addressing the wrong name. So it was nigh on impossible to heal this, because that trauma exists with that name frequency. So until we call forth that name frequency, can't be healed. It's impossible to heal it. So I hope that's insightful. Let's see any other questions. Hold on. Nobody else is saying anything else. So We've been chatting for 40 minutes now. If you have anything you'd like to share in the chat, please do pop that. That's God, I shouldn't reveal what I've got in my hand. Uh, I've got a unicorn sock that I was just wiping my glasses with. So I must apologize for the unicorn sock. I'll pop it over here for now. I love a unicorn. And again, the unicorns, if you look at, and I haven't got a British passport at hand just now, but if you go back to looking at the passports, the old Scottish passports, if you look at the UK shield, which is on your passport, you've got a unicorn with the crown around his neck, and you've got a lion with the crown on his head, depicting that the crown lineage is controlling the planet. The lion with the crown could be I do see people shapeshift into lion beings, which I think are the lion beings. But in the authority of the mainstream, they are saying that the unicorn has the crown around his neck. So it's fallen in consciousness. Now, if you look at an old Scottish passport, the old Scottish passport had two unicorns. It did not have a lion and a unicorn. It has a lion and a unicorn now, but it had two unicorns back in the day. So what does that tell you? That tells you that we existed in perhaps another frequency, another dimension of reality. Was that to the Tartarian Empire dimension, when the unicorns had the crowns on their head and there was no lion in the shield? It's a question mark. Is that a truth? I don't know. We can investigate it. We can consider these things, and we can look about, and I love the talk and the conversation around the Tartarian Empire, because that has been distorted and that lies within your soul. So these records that are not really written in the history books, and I know from when I did this work on television, because most of you know I did past life regression on mainstream terrestrial TV, and I did it on a show called This Morning, and then I did two series of a show called Have I Been Here Before? But by the time we went to the second series of the show called Have I Been Here Before, I was having feedback in my ear as I'm regressing, and I'm obviously working with the highest integrity for the person who is the subject for my regression. I'm working as a therapist. The byproduct is they may edit this and it may well be shown, but I personally am working for the highest integrity for the person who I am regressing. However, what they didn't really forewarn me was they had a historian sat in the gallery with the producer, and I was getting talk back in my ear going, the historian says that this life, what the person is saying is not correct. No, it's not correct to your history books, but I am regressing this person to help them heal, even though that is not being shown. The what we call an affect bridge of why I'm taking someone where I'm taking them, it was never really shown to you why I was taking them to that particular life, why they were accessing that particular life was due to some psychological chat we'd had when they first arrived, and I would interview them psychologically, and then I would say, is there anything you'd like to look at or explore, or have you got any issues going on? We won't publicly talk about those things, but that might be why we go back to that life, and it might be why I clear that life, but it will be edited not to show that. But when you've got a historian in your ear going, no, that doesn't seem a truth in the academic history books. Well, of course, it's not necessarily a truth in the academic history books, but it will be a truth of the soul of the person. So from a therapy point of view, when I'm seeing clients, I'm interested more in helping you heal emotional trauma than the information that you're coming out with being 100% accurate. Yet, saying that, a lot of the time the information is 100% accurate, and we can research these people, and they did exist. And even the other day, when I was working with a client, we were going back 5 generations, and the ancestor came forward. And I've got a video, I've put part of this story up, but I will upload. It was on Facebook, but I will upload it with the full story. So I won't go into the whole story here, but enough to say that an ancestor from 5 generations back came forward and told me the name of the family, told me what they did in the world, and we researched it, and that family and what they did in the world was true, and it was obscure. It wasn't a well-known family to the masses, from the early 1800s, but they existed. And even when I used to be on TV doing this stuff, the researchers would say, oh, we didn't find that information. But actually, the members of the public would go and research it and say, actually, that information was correct. We found that that person did exist. So this is the truth. And this is the distortion of the conspiracy theory people, which are like angry anarchists. And the problem that I have with the angry anarchists is you can be angry because you don't like what you're seeing, but at some point you have got to start to go inside yourself, and you cannot remain an angry anarchist, angry, fighting against this, fighting against, I don't think I should pay the council taxes. I don't think I should pay this. I'm angry with this. I'm angry with that. And we can say, no, it's not correct. You probably shouldn't be paying those things. But we have to contribute something because we like the roads. We like things to be nice for us to use. But instead of riling against it, you heal the frequency inside you that is creating that reality outside of you. And as we all individually go inside ourselves and heal the frequency inside ourselves that is creating the distortions, the timelines will shift, and we will all move into a more gracious and harmonious dimension and reality. But while we stay in this angry anarchist and they use our loosh to feed that angry anarchist energy, you're going to keep seeing more of what you don't want until you finally realize that the penny drops and you've got to face your own inner world, because most of the distortions outside of you are coming from the collective distortions of humanity. Let's see. Jen's saying she liked what I said about the name. Yeah. So I hope you've all enjoyed that. Thanks for joining me. I am going to be in Sedona, Arizona on the 10th, although I will be there by the 11th. The 10th to the 31st of March this year. So I'm going to be in Sedona in Arizona, and I shall be looking forward to meeting those of you who are called to come and meet me in Sedona. I love Sedona. I used to spend a lot of time in Sedona. I do like the energy there. I hope it won't be too hot that time of year. And I am back in Cornwall for a little trip before I leave. And then I'll be back in the UK again. So thanks for joining me. My website is down below or somewhere. I'll just put it in the link. But it's andreafoulkes.com. And I work with people online daily, half an hour sessions, and then my in-person sessions are 2 hours. But the work that I do online is very, very powerful. And I do speak at talks and events, and I will get my act together and run a workshop this year, probably around the Glastonbury area at some point. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. I hope that has been helpful, enlightening, moving our energy away from the Babylonian occult priest energy and the angry, ranting truthers, and seeing that our power lies within us to move to a future reality where everything is gracious, harmonious, and loving. And as we hold that frequency, we have to do the inner work to completely align with it. So, much love, many blessings. See you all soon. Much love. I don't know how to end this, but I'll work it out. Bye.